Good evening. A Supreme Court appointed panel of experts examining India's regulatory mechanism in an investigation linked to the Hindenburg allegations has given a clean chit to the Adani Group and has said that it appears that there was no regulatory failure on the part of the market regulator SEBI. The experts committee, comprising domain experts, has also said that there was no price manipulation on part of the Adani Group and that the conglomerate had taken necessary steps to comfort retail investors. Well, joining us now, the senior lawyer Mukul Rohatgi, who's been tracking these developments very, very closely. Sir, thanks very much for being with us. In simple terms, what are the implications of the Supreme Court Expert Committee report for the Adani Group?
Well, from what the report shows, as of today, it has not found any malfeasance or misfeasance on the part of the Adani Group, whether it be a case of stock price manipulation, whether it be a case of complying with related party transactions, whether it be a case for keeping minimum public shareholding, etc., etc. The report seems to suggest that there is no material to support any of these accusations which were being flung against the group earlier.
Is there any material in the report to support any of the accusations?
Well, I would put it this way, that as of now the report is conclusive. It is headed by no less than a retired judge of the Supreme Court and certain experts. They have examined everything. They have taken input from SEBI. As of today, there is no material to hold that the Adani Group is lacking on any front. That's how I would describe the position today. And also, mind you, it also says that there were 6 entities, out of which 4 were foreign entities, which actually benefited from this short selling. Probably they had wind of this Hindenburg report a day earlier, and they made some unscrupulous profits by short selling earlier and then buying it later, etc. So that's what it says, and I think this should calm some ruffled feathers. And in fact, the report goes on to say that Adani has taken mitigating factors in boosting investor confidence, and the Adani shares are kind of stable, and everything seems to be kind of all right.
All right, sir. Thanks very much for being with us. Well, joining us now, Mr. Sandeep Parekh. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Parekh. Let's just go through a couple of the points that have actually been mentioned in this report. Firstly, no law violated in the rise of the Adani share price, and that SEBI was fully aware of changes in the share price. These 2 points, how are they really significant in terms of the overall report?
So I would say, that's kind of 90% of the issue if you think of it, because the rest of it is, I think, technical, which I'll explain in a bit. The key issue is, was there any fraud or manipulation? And, if there was no even at a prima facie stage, they've not found fraud, that means that obviously at the end stage, with a 10% probability you don't find fraud, obviously with a 95% probability you certainly won't find fraud. So I think seems like almost kind of the writing on the wall, so to speak, on this. I think the other issue which you've not asked about is, I think, is much more trivial, and I think it's been given a lot of importance, which is the minimum public shareholding, which is also connected to the end beneficial ownership, that are the promoters themselves owning shares of the company but not disclosing. That's really the second issue, which is clubbed together. One aspect is the beneficial ownership, the other is the minimum public shareholding. And I think that's simply a minor thing, because if you've been reading the papers past several years, lots and lots of public sector companies are actually not fulfilling MPS norms. So that's kind of more to do with something which is good to have, but it's not. It's in no way kind of a serious offense like fraud or front running or insider trading.
How important was that testimony of the Mauritian minister who looks after their regulatory system? And what he remarked, that there is no illegal existence of shell companies in the Mauritius. How important is it in supporting or backing or reinforcing some of the points mentioned by the Supreme Court report?
I think it's important because it goes to the second point of, there's been no misreporting as far as ultimate beneficial ownership goes. And of course, Adani Group has stated on affidavit that they are in fact genuine entities and not kind of connected to the promoters. So ultimately, of course, it will say the SEBI committee will supervise the SEBI investigation, which is going to be tabled before the Supreme Court on the 14th of August or before that. So we'll, of course, these are just prima facie views which have come out. It's not the last chapter; it's really the first chapter. But I think, as I said, the main thing is fraud and manipulation of the markets, and I think they seem to have got a clean sheet on that.
Mr. Parekh, is it not deeply problematic in our system that political leaders, political parties in Parliament would go on and on this particular issue, further eroding shareholder wealth, the wealth of companies themselves, India's international reputation, and a lot of this, when there was already a Supreme Court monitored panel which was looking into these allegations?
That's the nature of politics, right? I think if they get fodder, why not use it? So I guess it's kind of the group is an easy target because, given the known proximity to the actually all governments, but they're being called out as being close to the current government. But I think they have solid assets. The ports are world class. They have cement factories which they acquired, which are good. So I think they all own solid assets. Today I came in the Bombay airport, which is, I think, again world class. I came from Changi, which is considered to be a great airport. So I think they have fabulous assets. It's just, I think, at what price they're kind of traded is obviously, whether it's too high or too low. I don't think it's for people to really second guess. They were indeed quite high relative to their peers, and they have fallen. So when people complain about falling prices, people don't see how much they'd gone up in the past. So broadly, I'm not too concerned about the stock price of the company itself. But yes, you're absolutely right that there seems to be a lot of political kind of undercurrent behind this entire case.
And the implications of that, my point is absolutely huge. It's unbelievable. I mean, how huge it has been. And no one could wait for this report. But be that as it may, there's another key point over here in the report, and I'm going to quote from it. The ED has intelligence of potentially violative selling before the report was made public, and that this may lead to charges of concerted destabilization of Indian markets. So this is more than just the Hindenburg report itself. Hindenburg comes out with a report and they make a statement saying that we are short sellers and we are doing what we are doing, and therefore we are not fraudulent. However, the moment the Supreme Court panel says that there was an effort at destabilizing Indian markets and that they have intelligence of something like this happening even before the report, would it be wrong of me to ask whether there was a conspiracy?
So I guess we'll have to wait on the 14th August to kind of answer your question. I have no kind of special knowledge of what happened, which are the entities who had access to the Hindenburg report before it was published. But certainly if there is, there's sufficient evidence of kind of either a beer cartel or kind of short selling, which is manipulating of nature, I think SEBI and the committee will certainly look at it.
All right, Mr. Parekh, thanks very much for sharing your views on the findings of this report. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks.
Joining us now, Krishnamurthy Subramanian. He's been the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. He's also an economist. He's a professor of finance. He's worked on India's post-COVID economic strategy. He's also written, among other things, on Adani businesses. What are the implications of this, Dr. Subramanian?
Thank you very much, Vishnu, for having me here. Let me first start by reminding viewers that at the peak of the Adani episode, I had written this piece. Primarily, the thesis was that the Hindenburg report had actually called Adani the biggest scam ever. Now, when one makes a claim like that, it is reasonable to say that, you have ruled out all plausible explanations. If you have to say there is fraud happening, then every reasonable explanation, and when I say reasonable, it means actually one that does not involve fraud, has to be ruled out. What one saw when we look at the stock price, and having taught valuation for a living and having built on Ashwath Damodaran, who himself is actually one of the experts on valuation, what one saw was that the stock price of Adani increased post 2021, primarily from March 2021 onwards. And if you would recall, that was the time when the post-COVID budget was presented, and the Indian economy, changed tack to invest far more in infrastructure. And investors actually in stock markets interpreted Adani to be a beneficiary as an infrastructure enterprise. You add some, irrational exuberance, which typically does happen whenever there is any regime change that happens in the economy, and the change towards infrastructure investments in India was indeed such a regime change. Then you have one possible explanation. As I would like to make very clear, it's not the possible explanation, but one possible and reasonable explanation for the stock price, which basically then says that, the claim that it is the biggest fraud in history is not right. I actually feel very, very happy to be vindicated by the report that has been submitted to the Honorable Supreme Court, where the panel of experts clearly says that they cannot find any evidence to suggest that there was any fraud involved. In fact, I would also like to mention that a couple of weeks back, in the Mauritius Parliament, the president there also made a statement that there are no entities, that have been discovered doing something hanky-panky from Mauritius onwards. So I think that is the key perspective for us to remember going forward. And I've actually looked at some of the measures that have been suggested, in terms of related party transaction disclosures, etc. And I have many more ideas to actually add to what the expert committee has mentioned.
I just wanted to look through two key points over here, which the Supreme Court panel has actually focused on. They've said there is no law which has been violated in the rise of Adani share prices. Isn't this critical to the entire issue?
That is extremely critical. So they go into, two key aspects. One is the public holding. Second, they actually look at, disclosure of related party transactions, in fact, and a third part, which is the stock price manipulation. And by looking at the, evidence, actually the panel included several experts, and they've gathered good evidence. What they find is in none of the three do they find any convincing evidence of fraud or manipulation, and that is critical. What they do also provide evidence for is the fact that post the this episode, retail investor interest in the Adani stock has increased. They also find that at the new level, the Adani stock price is quite stable, which actually I interpret as some of the irrational exuberance that was there, in the stock price before this report was published. I think that irrational exuberance has been taken out from the stock price, and what we've now got is basically just a reflection of the fundamentals derived from the regime change towards infrastructure and the value that especially revenue growth that the Adani group of companies can get. So I think that is extremely critical when we look at the fact that having looked at SEBI's data that SEBI has shared and all the other evidence, the expert panel has come up with the conclusion that there's nothing hanky-panky.
There have been reactions now coming in. The Congress party has said, and I find this interesting, that Jairam Ramesh writes, given the reputation of the members of the committee, we do not want to say anything more on its report except that its conclusion was already anticipated. Isn't that bizarre that there is aspersions being cast, it appears, on the basis of that sentence, on the people who are extremely distinguished? And so my question is this: was this panel of people who were randomly picked, or people with questionable, integrity? So
Vishnu, I can actually tell you, among the panel of experts, there are two people whom I worked very closely with. Mr. K.V. Kamath, when I used to work with ICICI, he was the MD and CEO, and on a project, I had worked with him as well at that point in time, and Somashekar Sundaresan, whom actually I've been co-member on two committees, both the SEBI Corporate Governance Committee and the PJNI Committee. And having known these individuals, these aren't individuals who would basically do the bidding, of somebody, who somebody tells them to do X, they'll do X. These are independent, minded individuals, and they're experts as well. I think, this has become a trend which I actually would like to, strongly discourage, that when the message does not seem to be fitting the priors, there is a tendency to actually call names on the messengers. I think that is a tendency that must be avoided.
Sure.
The particular instance that you mentioned is precisely about trying to call names on the messenger just because the message is unpalatable.
One more, a couple of other points which have just appeared now. The Congress says that LIC, the Life Insurance Corporation of India, was the biggest buyer of Adani Securities with the purchase of 4.8 crore shares when the share price went up from 1,031 rupees to 3,859 rupees. This raises the question in whose interest LIC was working. But doesn't the LIC, isn't it bound to invest in those properties that it believes it has to invest in? Does it imply that it's working at someone's behest?
I don't think so, Vishnu. World over, insurance companies, given the capital that they have, they invest in, in companies. They, in fact, occupy board positions. This is not something that is peculiar to India. And, in the interest of their, of their security holders, their insurance holders, they need to invest in companies where they expect, stock price appreciation or overall, their money to do well. And, if you think about it, there are many retail investors that would have invested as well. As I wrote, as somebody who's taught valuation for a living, if you go back to 2021, it would have been a good investment given the regime change towards infrastructure investments. And, again, a reasonable, explanation can be that in its judgment at that time, LIC actually invested. It's very important to keep in mind that many times, hindsight is 20/20, and, after the event, this happened a lot actually, in another instance, sure, actually, where if you look at some of the bank lending that happened, where post the, discovery of default, there was basically, the use of hindsight bias. I think we have to be careful. These are decisions that are taken at that point in time to use information that comes later, then say, oh, X should have been done. It could have been just, judgment. Right. And in my opinion, actually not necessarily bad judgment either, because the stock price did indeed appreciate. And during the period, during which this appreciation happened, the policy holders of LIC did, sort of get benefits. And as the report has very rightly pointed out, now the stock price of Adani has stabilized at a level which I interpret as without the irrational exuberance. So overall, I think even with the decline of the stock price, I think the LIC investment seems to have made money.
Okay. Let me just go through another couple of points which have been raised as a counter to to the report itself and its findings. SEBI has been unable to convince itself that the FPIs contributing to the fund are not linked to Adani. This is what the report actually says. So the Congress party says that this brings them back to the question of the much larger fund of at least 20,000 crore rupees. So is that a connection that can naturally be drawn?
So Vishnu, as I was saying, in response to your very first question, when, one has to actually show fraud or document fraud, one has to have a smoking gun, one has to have convincing evidence. Even in judicial parlance, we're actually told that, you are innocent until proven guilty. And, what the report has clearly documented using the evidence and, from the reading of my reading of the report, it is clear that SEBI has shared the data that they had. For instance, the report also talks about the fact that they have these automated flags and about 900 odd flags actually that went up in the Adani case each one of them were investigated, and they find that in one of the stock price runs, if anything, the FPI investors actually sold, or when they bought not only in Adani, but they bought in many of the other entities as well. So I think when you look at the collectivity of the evidence, the collection of evidence that has been gathered in the report, and using high quality data, it is very difficult to actually say that there has been something hanky-panky that's been done.
Sure.
And bottom line is, if you don't have the evidence, if you don't have the smoking gun, then you cannot pin it on fraud. And I think while there may be reason for SEBI to further go into and the report does talk about some of the policy changes that happened in earlier times, I think the evidence is preponderant that there is no hanky-panky or something that can be actually proved in this particular instance.
And just briefly, a final question. What the Congress says is that the committee, this Supreme Court appointed committee, has been unable to arrive at a final conclusion regarding the violation of SEBI laws by the Adani Group. That may be correct because there is a SEBI report which is correct, which is expected. But based on this report itself, do you not believe that there is fairly decisive evidence to suggest that there is no hanky-panky, to use your words, and that the Adani Group is clean in the face of the allegations which have been raised against it?
Yes, let me, Vishnu, point this counterfactual. Suppose, let's say, think about this what-if scenario where the same committee of experts had come up, with a report which said, oh, we have some evidence of hanky-panky. What do you think would have been the response, the political response? They wouldn't have actually called, these experts questionable, or basically, because the message would have been something that would have been welcome. They would have actually, in fact, gone to town saying that these messengers are extremely credible. It is because the message is something that actually does not sit well with their political, conveniences. The messengers are being called into question. And, you would have noticed, I noticed this, very often on my own Twitter handle, when I put out, high quality, evidence-based assessments, because there is nothing that can be called on the evidence, on the quality of the evidence itself. All one gets is basically some name calling, the typical, strategy of basically, trying to destroy the credibility of the messenger when the message is unpalatable. I think this is an important point. It's a trend that I've been observing, in the politics, and I think that's something which has to actually be, avoided. But more broadly, I actually, as I've said consistently, and I would, mention that when none of this evidence was there, when the Adani episode was happening, at that time itself, using valuation principles, I had pointed out that if there is a reasonable explanation, when I say a reasonable explanation, one that does not involve fraud, then the evidence of fraud is basically very, very flaky. Sure. And I think I stick to that. I'm really glad that that conviction with which I actually put out that assessment has been proved right. So overall, I think the evidence is very clear that there is no way to establish hanky-panky, and the panel of experts whom I place a lot of faith on in their expertise and in their independence has come up with this assessment.
All right, Krishnamurthy Subramanian, thank you very much for joining us, the former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Besides anything else, also responding point by point to some of the issues now raised by the Congress party in response to that report coming out.